Hello, everyone. Yeah. Nice to see you all. I am going to just turn this over to our wonderful students. I got to spend an hour with Nicole before this and learned a ton already. I can't wait to continue the conversation. I'd like to say thank you to the German Embassy for supporting Campus Weeks and being able to being so invested in encouraging students to learn German, to study Germany, to understand Germany's economy, culture, history, politics. And we hope that you'll have lots of questions. Ask everything. This is what we encourage. Nicole confirmed beforehand. Please. So thank you very much for being here. It's really nice and friendly to meet you in person. And I'm going to turn it over to our beautiful students to introduce you further.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Our guest speaker for today is Nicole Hayworth. We've had the pleasure of sitting down yesterday afternoon and getting to know a little bit better. Nicole graduated from the University of Arkansas in 2015, where she earned her bachelor's in international management. During her time as an undergrad, Nicole also studied Chinese, which is at least partially the result of her parents' persistent encouragement to do so, given the increasing importance of Chinese in our globalized market.
It wasn't partially, it was fully.
After earning her bachelor's, Nicole went on to work with several marketing and recruiting agencies, including the Oklahoma-based staffing and recruiting company, Inseed, as well as the North Carolina-based digital marketing agency, Assertive. Although Nicole later went on to work in recruiting for 8 years, and it's one of her primary areas of expertise and passions today, she initially had her mind set on pursuing a career in marketing and sales, before realizing that she wasn't quite content working in those fields. She describes this change in her career trajectory as falling into the role of recruiting. And Nicole's example shows us that what we might initially picture ourselves doing may not be where we ultimately end up, and our ideal job very well be something that doesn't cross our minds right now.
So today, Nicole is the interim global talent acquisition lead at Commercetools, where she describes her role as a complete 180 of everything she just done before. In the past, she was actively recruiting and working with teams, but now she's the one managing those teams and continuously learning about her new responsibilities. Commercetools, for anyone who doesn't know, is a German tech company that was based in Munich and was formed in 2006 and has grown to several offices worldwide, including one in Germany. And as the name suggests, it deals with digital commerce and its constant evolution, has constant evolution in the business market. Nicole told us that in order to be successful, you have to act on the spot, and which is the method that brought her here to us today. And we're excited to hear more. Please help us welcome Nicole.
Everyone, it's so nice to be here. I'm Nicole. They gave a great introduction, but let me talk a little bit more about myself and kind of how I got here. So like I said, I went to the University of Arkansas. So I'm originally from Kansas City, the Midwest. Went to the Sam Walton School of Business. If you're not familiar, Sam Walton invented Walmart. So fun fact, I was telling Katie earlier, we have the smallest Walmart in the world on campus. We call it Walmart. So I graduated from Arkansas, and I was telling them yesterday, I don't know if any of you have felt this way or are going to feel this way. I graduated with a degree in leadership and I was 21 years old, and I was like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this, right? Like, I can't go ask to be a leader of a team. I'm 21, I just graduated. I had no idea what to do. So luckily I had some friends who were a year above me in school, and I reached out to them and I was like, what the heck am I supposed to do with my life? Like, we're supposed to have it figured out. I don't have it figured out. What's the deal? Luckily my best friend worked at a staffing agency. He was like, come work here. So tried it out. It ended up being like the perfect fit for me. Like I was telling them yesterday, sometimes you just kind of like fall into things and they turn out to be the right things for you. And I hope that is the case for all of you, because it made my life a little bit easier. So I started at a staffing agency in Oklahoma, near where I grew up. They asked me, they said, are you willing to move? I said, sure, send me wherever. So I went to North Carolina the very first time to pick out an apartment. And that was back in 2015. I've been here since. So I do love it. I've fallen in love with the area. I think I'll stay here long term. And I was working at an agency for a few years, decided to go into corporate. So let me tell you a little bit about the difference there. Agency means that I'm working for a bunch of different companies. So like, for example, UNC, Cisco, IBM, they might have a hard time filling some of their roles. And so they would call me and say, hey, can you help us fill some of our positions? really tough job because you make almost nothing. I was making 34K out of college. I don't know how I did it. You couldn't do that now. And you work on mostly commission. So it's such a grind, great opportunity, but I wanted to get more in-house. So what that means is I transitioned to working for a company and hiring for that company. The reason I loved doing that is I got to use my own personal experiences of working with the company to get other people excited to potentially work there. And I got to kind of like see the impacts that I could make long term, right? If I hire a VP of engineering and he kills it and he's rockstar and keeps winning awards and he's doing awesome, I'm like, heck yeah, like I helped make that happen. So I feel like I was able to make a really big impact from the corporate side and see that kind of long-term growth. And then just randomly, I ran into Commercetools, and I had never ever heard of Commercetools before, like probably all of you. But we're pretty big in the tech industry and in the commerce industry specifically. When I started at Commercetools, we were about 200 employees. We're now 650, and it's been 2.5 years. So let me tell you a little bit more about Commercetools. Oh, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we're a German-based organization. So we were founded in Munich in 2006. Currently, we have a $1.9 billion valuation and over 100 million in ARR, which is annual recurring revenue, which means every year we make at least $100 million. So raise of hands if in the last month you shopped online at Lululemon, H&M, Sephora, Ulta Beauty, LL Bean, any of those, raise of hands. Okay, got a few. You use Commercetools software to do that. So we're basically the back engine empowering a lot of these companies to sell online. We had a lot of really intense years during COVID when the shift to online shopping happened. It actually ended up being really good for our business. So we are one of the big providers of e-commerce software, and we have our US-based headquarters in Durham. So it worked out for me from a location perspective as well. Like I said, we went from 200 to 650 employees in a couple of years, which means I worked really hard. And now we have 12 offices worldwide and 35 countries represented. So our employees live in 35 countries. So I truly work in a global corporate environment every day. So I'm going to talk to you all a little bit more about my experience working in a global and primarily German-based organization. I want to be very clear that it is just my personal experience. I don't want to stereotype anything, but this is my lived experience as working in a global corporation and how that differs from previously. I've always worked in American-based corporations. So when I talk about like this slide, it is like what impacts my day-to-day of working in a global corporation. So are you all familiar with GDPR? Yes, no, maybe? No. Okay, GDPR, I'll give you the very small amount that I know. It's really great if you live in Europe. It's really bad for me. Let me tell you why. So GDPR basically kind of protects you from being sold to or being kind of like followed online. Like for us, we're followed everywhere we go. I used to work in a digital marketing agency. I used to be the people that do that sell you ads based on things that you've searched. So I don't believe that Apple's listening to us, but sometimes it feels that way. But they are tracking us. Oh, we need to admit this person. I got it. Welcome. So basically, the European Union was like, we're going to put an end to you being followed online. Really cool for them. Like I said, really bad for me. Let me tell you what. So it has a lot of impacts on my day-to-day as well, because we are not allowed to continue following people without their permission. So when somebody applies to a role online, they go into what's called an applicant tracking system, right? So you submit your resume, you answer a couple questions, you might put in a cover letter, all that comes to me. But the problem is, because of GDPR, if you live in Europe, I have to delete your data every 6 months. US, not the same. I can hold on to you for 10 years. And if I have a role that comes up in 10 years that I think you might be a fit for, I can still contact you. Because of GDPR, we have to be so careful of how we handle sensitive data when it comes to our candidates. You literally can't even print out a resume and hold on to it. If I print out a resume, I have to use it for the interview and then I have to shred it. They're very protective of their citizens' data, which is great for them, but it's a pain for me because it doesn't help me at all. It actually makes my life worse, but it's great for them. So because of this, we talk a lot about GDPR in my day-to-day life. Every time that I have a new tool that I want to invest in, like we're really looking heavily into investing in AI tools, I have to run it by my data security team, and they are sticklers because the consequences of not following GDPR are super high. Like it could cost the company millions and millions of dollars if I'm not handling employee and sensitive data correctly. So something that I have to be mindful of every day in my job is how I'm handling data of European citizens. Labor law, very different in the US versus worldwide. So in the US, 49 states are called at-will states. Montana is the only state that is not at will. If you're not familiar with that, it basically means you can be fired for any reason at any time as long as it's not discriminatory. So we don't have very good labor laws for us. Once again, the US is a little bit far behind when it comes to employment law. So basically what that means, as I see it, is in the EU, they're way more employee friendly. It is a lot more difficult to be fired. You have to denote everything. But something that we deal with a lot in HR at my company is probationary period. So that is kind of our wiggle room. We have a 90-day probational period. And we say, if you're not succeeding at 90 days, we can fire you at any time within the first 90 days. But once you make it past 90 days, it's super, super hard. So it's a lot more complicated. It requires a lot more paperwork. Like with my team, if I wanted to fire someone, it's a huge, long process. We have to consult legal. We have to consult multiple areas of HR, much different. And then they also have something called garden leave. So if you fire someone, typically you have to put them on garden leave. And garden leave basically says, you're no longer with the company, we're cutting off all of your access, but we're paying you almost like a severance. So we're paying you for the next 3 months, but you cannot apply to any other jobs. You can't get another job. You get to just chill for 3 months and get paid the same amount. Severance, if you were to get laid off and your company's nice, they'll give you a severance, which basically says, I'll pay you for 3 months, but if you want to go get a job, you can get that job. Time frames. So this comes up probably the most. This is the biggest challenge for me in my day-to-day. Time zones. And I know that sounds kind of minute, but my 11 a.m. is 5 p.m. for Germany. So I start working at like 7:30 in the morning. And my mornings are typically back to back. So I have something typically from like 8 to noon, I have a meeting. And then the nice thing, which I prefer, is my afternoons are a little bit slower. So something to take into account, you decide to go into some sort of international organization, like your sleep schedule is gonna change. And we try not to hire anybody in California or on the West Coast, because people can say all the time, like, oh, I'm fine waking up at 5 a.m. I don't believe that you will be long term. Something else that is different that impacts me in my job are notice periods. So in the US, if I were to leave my job, 2-week notice, get it done, wrap it up, and then go. In Europe, it's very weird. It's like 2 or 3 months typically is the typical notice period. I don't know why, because I can't imagine being like, I don't want to work here. And they're like, cool, 3 more months of this. Like, doesn't make sense to me, but that's something we have to adapt to as a recruiting team, is when they put in their notice, it might be 3 months before we can get them in the door. Something I've noticed a lot too, and this is just kind of things that I've experienced and heard, is when you're working in a global market, like getting the American market right is incredibly important. I think from a global perspective, they look at America as kind of like a pillar of success, right? Like we used to run the global economy. We're pretty well known for having large corporations. So for us, we're always talking about how do we get America right? Not from my team, but like kind of the larger organization, sales organization. There tends to be a lot of large enterprise customers in the US. So when we're building out teams, a lot of times we will look for leaders in the US who have had success in the American market, especially as a company that's getting larger and larger. If we were to be thinking about an IPO, which is basically going public, they want to be able to do that on the New York Stock Exchange. And from what I've heard, like it is a big step for a German-based organization to go public on the New York Stock Exchange. So kind of like a status symbol from what I've heard and what I've experienced. But this is what I've just observed as like cultural adaptations to working in a German-based company. Very straightforward way of communication. So I'm from the Midwest, so I'm very much like, tell me about your life, how's your dog, what's going on. That doesn't always fly depending on who I'm talking to. It's kind of like get to the point, but don't take it personal. We always have an agenda set. We always have a purpose in mind. It's just a lot more of a straightforward way of communication in my experience. But it's not personal. There's not a lot of fluff, but it's not personal. They can still love you the same if they don't want to hear about your dog or your life or what's going on in your world. Timeliness is incredibly important. My chief revenue officer lives in Switzerland and he jokes that he works like a Swiss watch. So if you're not on time, you're late. Well, you are late, but if you're not late, you're late. But something I also noticed too is I have seen so much cultural and regional diversity with my colleagues in Germany. The vast majority of my German colleagues are not from Germany typically. The visa process is way easier than it is in the US. In the US, if you're not familiar with the visa process, it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. You might have to wait a couple years. You have to get employment lawyers. Like, it is a huge undertaking. And we're pretty easily able to transfer folks from different countries to our European locations with a lot more ease and a lot less money than we can do that in Europe. Any questions so far? So I'm gonna kind of switch gears here. Okay, something else I was asked to talk about was the importance of women in tech. I'm super passionate about this because technically I am a woman in tech. I don't always take it seriously because I am not like a software engineer, right? But something Katie and I were talking about earlier is the importance of lived experiences. And a reason that that's so important is I can only truly understand an experience of what I've lived. I can do my best to try to step into an experience of someone with a different background than me, but I'm not going to be able to truly understand what that's like unless I live it. So the more representation we have, the more we're able to understand everyone's lived experiences, where they're coming from. So let me tell you a little bit about how that works on my team. My team is all women right now, which is not very diverse-wise, but for a company that is a tech company, we're still the minority. We still have a majority men in our company. So when I see like the impact of the fact that my team is diverse compared to the tech company, I think of this one thing that we're in the process of doing, which is including interview diversity in all of our interview panels. So gender diversity. What that really means is if you go through an entire interview at Commercetools, you're not going to interview with the same gendered person the whole time. I know that seems very minute, but it's something that we think about because we could possibly go through an interview process and only meet with men. And that's not very representative or inclusive or going to make you feel like you belong here if you're not seeing folks in the interview process who look like you, sound like you, come from a background of yours. So that's like one of the small things that I think hopefully the fact that we don't look like everybody else can like make an impact on. But there's so many more ramifications, right? Because if I am looking different, sounding different, coming from a different experience, and I'm able to make an impact on the products we sell, on how we look at things, on how we look at the world's going to get better because the world is not, I'll speak for tech, the world is not all white men. We have had a lot of products and a lot of success on catering to white men, but think about how much more money you can make when you have folks in the world who are thinking about these other folks and what they need and how we can help them. At the end of the day, like, we're going to increase bottom line by getting more diversity, specifically gender diversity in tech. And then we can help improve the gender pay gap. So this was actually a super interesting thing that I found. Women in tech have only 3.5% wage gap compared to 17% elsewhere. We're super careful about that at my company too. We have specified salary bands for every single role. So if you came to me and you said, I want to make 50K and my salary band says you need to make 70K, we're offering you 70K. So we're very sure to make sure that everybody falls into those salary bands. And it's something I think the tech industry as a whole had the opportunity to kind of take under their wing. And for the most part, a lot of great tech companies are doing that and helping, hopefully over time, to kind of decrease that wage gap there. Different viewpoints. Like I said, if you're sitting in a room where everybody thinks the same, has the same experiences, you're going to come up with the same thing, the same ideas, and we're not going to have a lot of diversity of thought, diversity of products, diversity of anything. So companies that went from no female corporate leadership to 30% had a 1% increase in net margin. And think about, we make $100 million a year. Like, that's not nothing. And a 15% increase in profitability. So obviously representation matters in every sector of the world, but I think specifically in tech, because historically it has been white male dominated. But something I always say is we do need to wait for the market to catch up. So I think diversity has been something that I've seen being mentioned a lot since like 2019, 2020 of like, let's really focus on getting women in tech, women software engineers. And something I always like to note to my hiring team is okay, yes, you want a female leader in tech who's been in tech for 20 years ago, because that's important to you now. Think about what those rooms looked like 20 years ago. Like, what a software engineering class looked like 20 years ago. There was maybe one woman in that classroom, right? So it's important to note that, like, just because we see the need for change now doesn't mean we don't have to wait for the market to kind of catch up to where we are. And I'm super excited to see with y'all's generation and kind of 20 years from now, what those teams and rooms are going to look like. But as of right now, it's tough, right? Because it's like, hurry up and wait. We have to wait for those folks those women, girls, non-binary people who went through school to eventually kind of catch up to where we are now in the market now. Okay, here's where I think I can be really helpful, because this is my job. So I also want to talk and have kind of an open question answer discussion to any questions that you all have about job searching, interviewing, resume building. Like, I'm your girl, please take advantage of me. I've been doing this for 8 years. I help my friends do this. I do this literally every day. But I'll start with some tips, and then if you have any questions, like, interrupt me anytime. So we're going to start from like the beginning to the end of the process. So in the beginning, like, it is really important to be your own advocate. So if you're applying for a role, you're applying for an internship, it's super important that you understand your place in the market. What does that mean? Mostly I'm talking about money. So it's really important that you understand what the market should pay you for the skills that you possess in the role that you're going to take. This is your career, and starting off, like, this is very easy to say, oh, doesn't matter to me, whatever you all pay, like, that's fine. You'd want to try to be accommodating, right? I've been accommodating a lot. We need to stop being accommodating. You need to survive, you need to live, you need to be paid what you're worth. So you have to be your own advocate in these conversations. Too many times I have conversations with folks that say, I'll take whatever you offer me. You should come in with a number in mind. And as long as you're on the market and they are a good company, they should be respectful of that and receptive to that. Don't let somebody else choose how much you get paid, because how much you get paid actively affects your life, not their life. So make sure you do your research. Know what's important to you. No company is going to be perfect. So I think it's important to think of what you want and what you don't want in a company, right? So like, what specific things are really important to you? Is it really important that they have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging team? Is that really important to you? Is it really important that you make a lot of money? Is that important to you? Do you really want to work for a big company? Is that important to you? And kind of understand what you will and won't negotiate on, right? Like, there's a lot of things that are great to have, but like, they're not necessary, and no company's perfect. So it's important to denote what you will and won't settle for in an organization. And then kind of going to my next point, doing your research to find out if that organization has that for you. So when it comes to doing your research, aside from knowing how much you're worth, when you're looking at companies, like, look them up. Look on Glassdoor. Glassdoor, I have a love-hate with, because I think right now it's not as accurate as I think that the market represents, but do your research. So that's a great opportunity for you to, if you're not familiar with Glassdoor, basically employees can post anonymous reviews based on their experiences at that company. That's a really, really great insight and sneak peek into how it's actually like to work there. Because if you're talking to someone like me, I'm going to be honest, I'm going to tell you all the positives. Like, if you ask me about a negative, sure, we'll go through it. But I'm not going to say, oh, here's an area we're lacking, unless you specifically ask me. So go to Glassdoor. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I wonder if you know this, just being in the ins and outs of recruiting.
Yeah.
I have posted on Glassdoor before,
Yeah.
because I wanted to get access to see a different company, but I was
Yes.
terrified that the company that I work for would know it's me or be able to see, you know, if they,
No.
they would not be able to know.
It's truly, truly anonymous. Yeah, so they'll ask you, like, they'll say, do you want to post your location, your job title, something like that? You don't have to say yes to any of that. It'll say anonymous employee if you want it to. So I would be careful of that. If you work for a really small team or you're a team of one, just leave it totally anonymous. There's no way we can find out, but that's a really good question. So yeah, do your research, check Glassdoor, see if there's any areas that have a lot of concerns to you. Say diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is something that's really big on you, and you see, hey, the reviews are not reflecting that to me. Something like that you can take note, and we'll get to it, of interviewing it being a two-way street. You can ask questions later. So do your research on the company, make sure it's a company you want to work for. I typically say, in a typical market, I would not allow my loved ones to work for a company that is below 4 stars. In this market, I think it's 3.5 stars, because I've seen a huge downtick in Glassdoor reviews lately with all the layoffs that are happening. So if it's something below 3.5 stars, be a little suspect. Okay, so that's the second thing of doing your research. Now we're going to talk about doing your research before you interview. So you posted your resume, you applied, they said, hey, let's have an interview. Super, super important that you're doing at least a little bit of research before that call. Sneak peek, if you were to ever interview at Commercetools, Ola has gone through this. The very first question my team's going to ask you is, what do you know about Commercetools? And if you say, I don't know, we will say, thank you so much for your time. We can reschedule when you've had the time to do the research. All I'm looking for is that you know that we do e-commerce. Like, the bar is quite low, but you'd be shocked at the amount of people who can't tell you that Commercetools creates a tool to help with e-commerce. So do your research when it comes to that. There's nothing that you need to like over prepare for, but kind of know the basics of the company, what they do, maybe why you're interested in them, maybe a point that you're like, oh, I saw that you all do this and I think that that's really cool. The more prepared that you can be, the more impressed the person you're going to be talking to is, because I always think of it too, of like, sometimes it's not always a fun conversation to be like, hey, you didn't research us at all. But think about the time that I've invested into reviewing your resume. I'll look at your LinkedIn profile, see if we have mutual connections. If I spent more time than you and you're trying to get a job with me, that's a problem. So do your research there as well. When it comes to a resume, I don't care as much about formatting as long as it like makes sense. Like, don't do like, I've seen people, somebody literally recommended to my friend that she should have more color in her fonts, like red font. And I was like, no. So I'm not as picky on resumes, but something I do like to share is a little recruiter hack. The amount of times that I use Control F on a resume is literally every day. Every day. If I have like a specific skill that I need, Control F, I'm looking for that skill. So you need to make sure that if you have any specific hard skills, like you're really good at Excel, or you worked with this one thing that's like super unique or going to be really helpful for the job, make sure it's clearly listed on your resume. It's not enough to say, I work with spreadsheets. I'm not controlling F for spreadsheets. The average recruiter looks at a resume for 7 seconds, and to be honest, I think that's a little longer than I look at one. So you need to make sure that your experience is cleanly listed out very well. And if you want, I'll give you all my email and you can send me your resumes if you want. I'll be happy to take a look at them. Okay, so keywords really important in a resume. I always recommend don't put a picture. It's super common in the EU for folks to put a picture of themselves. That just introduces bias into a process that already has some bias. So I recommend just not doing a picture. They can figure out what you look like if they have a video call. The importance of a follow-up is my next thing. So say we're going through an interview, right? And your recruiter says, hey, okay, I'm going to get back to you by Friday of this week. I have so many people who are like, can I email them on Friday? Or is that like creepy? Like, am I being too eager? There's no such thing. I have only one time in my 8 years gotten annoyed at a candidate for reaching out to me, and it's because I rejected her once and she came back to me 10 times, 10, asking if she could read me for the job. 10. That would be the only time I've ever been annoyed. So follow up, because then it also shows that you're interested, right? So if I tell you Friday, maybe don't follow up on Wednesday and say, are you ready yet? But if it's Friday, it's getting towards the afternoon, if you haven't heard from me, you're going to help keep me accountable. And if I'm a good recruiter, I want to be held accountable. I want to make sure that I am communicating to you because it's stressful going into a weekend and we try to think about that, right? So don't be scared to follow up if you haven't heard in a while. Like, I think that's honestly a positive. I think that's a check mark in the positive department. But also this is something that I've seen a big decrease in lately is folks not really, I don't want to say it like, oh, I expect you all to thank us, but a thank you note can go so far, not necessarily with me, but with my hiring managers. I have some hiring managers that won't hire you if you don't send a follow-up thank you. And it doesn't have to be intense. It doesn't have to be long. It can literally be 2 sentences. So when I interview, the things that I say is, thank you so much for your time. I so enjoyed getting to know about you and X, like if they have a puppy in the background and we talked about the puppy, I'll be like, and your puppy's so cute. Here's why I'm super interested in the job. 3-4 sentences max. Make sure it does not have grammatical errors. Grammatical errors can steer you so wrong. But as long as you're sending that 3 to 4 sentences after that follow-up, it's not mandatory, but it can only be helpful to you as long as it doesn't have a bunch of errors in it. That reminds me of cover letters, which I didn't cover. I work in the corporate space. I don't care about cover letters. In my opinion, cover letters, I'll tell you a couple of situations in which they might be necessary, but they can really do you wrong. Because I've had so many people who address the wrong company, the wrong role, have a ton of grammatical errors, and that I have 1,200 resumes that I review a day. Like, I'm looking for reasons to let you go. And if you're addressing the wrong company, the wrong role, sorry, attention to detail, gotta pay attention. So cover letters can typically only stray you wrong. The only reasons that I would have a cover letter is if you're applying for an in-person job in a different place that you live and you're planning to move there and it's not obvious on your resume, right? If you're looking to kind of switch careers and you want to share how your past background and experience can relate to this new job that's not clearly listed on your resume, right? Do you want to clear up like a gap? Like if I stayed at home and was a stay-at-home parent for a couple years and it's not clearly listed on my resume, talk to me a little bit about that in the cover letter. But for the most part, from my perspective in the corporate tech world, cover letters, not a big deal anymore, which is good news because they are a pain. Okay, so then it comes to the interview. Interviewing is a 2-way street, and especially in this market, you should be interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. So another red flag I see is when I get to a part of an interview and I say, hey, do you have any questions for me? And they say, no, I think we're good. That shows to me that like you're just applying for this job because you want a job. And we want folks who like want to work at this company, want to be invested in what we're invested in, like have some shred of interest in what we talked about or what you saw online or the role or something like that. So make sure you're asking questions and get curious. Like if you're like, hey, I saw this on your Glassdoor profile, a good recruiter will be able to be like, yeah, I totally understand. Here, let me talk to you about this. Maybe not all recruiters are like that, but a good recruiter for a good company that you want to work for, they will be honest and open with you and they want to hear your feedback and your questions. So make sure that you're asking questions, you're staying curious throughout the process. It's kind of like being your own advocate, right? Like you don't want to be dragged along an interview process that you're not really enjoying. Like you want to be an active participant in that. And you should think of yourself interviewing the company every single interview because it's important that you want to work there. Like this is our life. We spent way too much time in work. I don't know how society set us up to be like, we're going to work most of our lives, but unfortunately it did. And so it's really, really important and valuable that you're at least somewhat enjoying your job. So please speak up and make sure you are going to enjoy the job at some point. Okay, so any questions before I talk about more stuff about interview? Yeah.
This kind of relates to this. I feel it just feels super awkward to ask a question when it's part of this like protocol that you're expected to do, but you're saying it's a good thing because I always thought it's like kind of, do you have a question? And then I ask a question and they know that I just sat at home and thought about this question that I'm going to ask because they will ask me a question, you know.
Totally fair. So that's a good point. So a lot of things that I see that are like maybe a little weird or like it's great to have like a list of questions that you're like, okay, I could pull one of these if it comes up. But then like, I can clearly tell if you Googled what question should I ask after an interview. You're like, what's the 30, 60, 90-day plan for this? And I'm like, I'm a recruiter. I have no idea. Like, I barely know enough about this role to be able to do it. I'm managing 15 jobs at one time. So I would ask a question that's, make sure it's relevant to the person you're talking to. So like if you're talking to a recruiter, don't ask about the specific expectations of the role. Like we don't know. Ask more about like the company. If you're talking to like a hiring manager, ask specific expectations of the role. If you're talking to an interview team, ask, how do you like working on this team? How do you like your manager? Just like, and it doesn't have to be these questions that like you could Google and they would tell you like, tell me about your experience. Like you can be real, like ask anything you're actually genuinely curious about. And I think that that will go a long way. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off that, like, it's expected, but you might as well like ask a real question.
Yeah.
So like I've asked about like either like DEI or
Yes.
it seems like your company's like turnover is high and like
Yes.
actually like not putting them on the hot seat, but like asking
Yeah.
real questions about like what's going on in the office or things that have changed, but rather than like I'm asking to ask.
Totally. And I love that. And I think that's super important and good companies should be able to not talk their way out of it, right? But like, if you were to come to me and say, hey, I see your DEI scores are really bad on your Glassdoor. My answer would be, I can't speak to anyone's lived experience and these people really have lived experiences, but let me tell you all the things that my company is doing to fight whatever this is, not fight it, but like combat it. Or let me tell you about this thing that we did, how much money we're donating to this organization. And a good company should be able to kind of work their way into that question and make you feel more comfortable with their answer. So that is a really good point.
So what are your tips for balancing the need to find a job to be able to survive and being able to like find a job that you like? Because something that I'm afraid of is like when I go to an interview, I don't want to seem like I'm being too picky or asking all these questions because they're thinking, well, you're just like out of college, you need to find a job anyways. And I just interviewed with like some crappy companies.
Totally. I think that's hard, right? Because you do have to be realistic that like you do need a job. And something that is important to be realistic about is like your first job is never going to be your best job. I told you I made $34,000 out of college. Your first job is never going to be your best, and you should never expect it to be your best, but you should expect to be treated well, be compensated well, somewhat enjoy what you're doing, and like be able to live a productive life. So I think as you get further on in your career, you can be a little bit more picky and you'll have more insider information, right? Like I know that X about this company, but when you start out, it is really a balancing act of like, what will you accept without compromising something that's really important to you. So that's why it's important to understand what is important to you and what you will settle for and what you will not settle for, and don't compromise on those. But I think eagerness is good. Eagerness is great. Like, of course, if somebody's super excited to work at my company, I'm like, hell yeah, I'm super excited to work at my company too. So I don't think you can be over eager, but also like manage your expectations that like entry level jobs are sometimes not that fun. But they're a really good building bridge. And with the way that we hire right now, a lot of what we hire for is like based on past experience. So it's a great step to get your foot in the door, but it doesn't have to be your end all be all, and set that expectation that it won't be. Yes.
I was wondering, because you said be your own advocate.
Yeah.
How do I make sure to know how much the market is paying?
Good question. Research and ask around. So Glassdoor has this feature that will allow you to see, if I were to type in, I want to be a talent acquisition manager at this company or a tech company in general, they'll tell you like, hey, Salesforce pays this, Salesforce pays a lot. So maybe take that down a little bit, but like they'll give you an average range based on where you live. There are a couple other sites that do that as well, so you can Google it. But if you have friends who are kind of like in the same situation as you, like it's kind of like a fun friend tag to like slowly establish, like we're going to talk about money in this friend group, because you're going to help me succeed. Me and my friends, we all talk about how much we make. They're like, oh, I just asked for this raise, you should ask for that too. Friends help friends. So if you have folks who are kind of in the same situation as you and looking at jobs, or maybe you have friends who already got a job, be like, hey, can I ask you like what you're making or like what you started off making? Because that's how we take down corporate America is by sharing compensation. Yeah. Yes.
I kind of have two things I wanted you to touch on. So like we've often been talking about like I guess, salaries, but like also compensation packages are like more than salary, and I'm talking about
Yes,
according
yes.
to that, but there's like healthcare,
Love that.
tuition reimbursement.
Love that.
Then I have a second one off.
Okay, great. I'm so glad that you mentioned that. That is a point that I should have mentioned. Your total compensation package, like salary is a big part of it, but it's only part of it. So I can speak for Commercetools, we have 100% free benefits. If I had 12 children, they all get free benefits. That's incredible. It's incredible. This is a perk of working for a German company or a European-based company. They love to give you stuff and we love to take it. So like, if I were to, okay, let's say realistically, I have at my last company, if I had a husband and 2 kids on my package, that would have been $400 a month that I would have had to pay for benefits. It's gonna be free. This is not, don't expect this, everybody. This is really, really incredible. So that also takes into account. So when you're talking about compensation, like it is all encompassing, make sure you have a good understanding of how benefits work. And how much that's gonna be taken out of your paycheck. Because most likely you're gonna have a company that's gonna take money out of your paycheck every month for things like healthcare, dental, vision, all of that stuff. Pay attention to 401k match. I've been made a lot of money off of 401k because you just like, what you do is you just say 10% of my salary goes in this bucket. I don't think about it at all. And then you leave the company, you're like, dang, like that was awesome. And they usually match onto it. So they pay you more into your bucket, like to encourage you to invest for retirement. And then also stock options can play like a little factor. Like if you were to work at Commercetools, most likely we'll make some money off of stock options, but beware if they try to say like, you don't need to make that much money because look at all the stock options we're going to offer you. Like stock options are monopoly money until they're not. So while they could be great additions, like that's something else to take into account. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Make sure you're taking a look at the total compensation package, including like if someone were to offer me 10K more, but they were like, oh, but you have like 5 PTO days, I'd be like, peace. Like I love my PTO days. So make sure you're looking at the full package. I'm really glad that you mentioned that.
And the second question was, how do you or do you think like most recruiters look at job hopping? I feel like our generation is really big on if we're not welcome here, if we don't like it, we're leaving.
I love that. I love that you all do that. So I see it totally differently from when I started my career to now. So like previously, if you had like I would say like 2015 to 2020, genuinely, like if you had less than 2 years of experience at every job, I'd be like, I would ask you about it. I'd be like, what is this about? But now because the power is kind of going into the employee's hands a little bit more. So you have the power to make a little bit more active decisions about what you decide to do with your career. It doesn't totally matter to me. I might ask you about it, like, why was this stint only like 6 months or a year? But like for me, 1 year is the old 2 years. So like if you can stay with a company a year and you can explain why you left and it was legit, it's not as big of a deal. But beware of like 3 months, like that adds up. But if you can explain your way out of that, that's totally fine too.
Hi, my name is Elton, and first of all, thank you for speaking with us.
Yeah.
So through this TAM program, next year I'm studying in Germany,
Awesome.
and I'm considering potentially, staying in Europe afterwards, or
Cool.
at least considering opportunities there.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I mean, specifically in the case of Commercetools, do you all hire Americans to work in the German headquarters ever, or in other positions in Europe or abroad? And then does nationality affect salary, frankly, and also like any other advice for Americans, looking for international opportunities?
For sure. I will say it's a lot harder to get a job if you live in America and you say, I want to move to Germany. So like if you're already in Germany, big plus, big perk. We don't look at nationality different. So we have German working students. So in the US, they're called interns. In Germany, and most of Europe, they're called working students. The stipulation with that is you have to be currently enrolled in a German-based program in order to be a working student for us. So you're not going to get paid. They make $16 an hour, which like is really good for German standards in Germany. But like people in the EU do not get paid nearly as much as people in the US. So take that into account too. But yes, Commercetools hires working students as long as you're enrolled in a German university for a certain amount of time. It doesn't matter what background you came from. Like I said, Germany is super, super, super diverse. So we have folks that come from all different countries.
Thank you. And one quick follow-up, because I'll be graduating with a degree from Humboldt as well, and I'm wondering if having a German degree is significant in terms of like being an expat looking for jobs. Is that something that you feel like up applying for jobs in Germany?
At my company, no, because we don't really look at degree requirements. But if you can speak German, that would be great, because we do have some roles that you have to be German speaking. Just based on like, it's like Germany can be really old school with like paperwork, and like we have multiple things where you have to have wet ink. So like someone has to come in and actually physically sign something, and we're a remote based company, so it's really challenging. So there might be some opportunities where like if you can speak German, that could be a huge plus. I don't think it's gonna hurt you at all, but like at Commercetools and hopefully other forward thinking companies who don't have degree requirements, I don't know that it will necessarily work in your favor as much.
Got it.
Yeah, of course. Anything else? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Cut me off if I'm taking too long or y'all need to get out of here. So when you're interviewing, let me tell you about the STAR method. Okay, so at my company, we do behavioral based interview questions. These suck. Like I hate answering them. You all hate answering them, but we gotta do it. And these are like, tell me about a time when, give me a situation in which. The reason we do these are so that we can actually learn what your actual experience is, versus if I were to be like, do you have good attention to detail? And you're like, yes. And I would have been great. Like, I don't know. So I want to ask you about a time in which you had to use your attention to detail to be successful. So I can see that you've actually done it, right? These are super awkward. Take your time, by the way. I have a lot of people who try to rush. They're like, okay, let me tell you about this. And then it ends up being like a crappy answer. Like, we're expecting you to take time to think, breathe, take a sip of water. Don't worry about that aspect. But when you answer one of those questions, here's the best way that you can do it. Here's how we train all of our interviewers to look for answers. STAR method. So we're going to start with S, situation. So situation. So I want you to start your answer by saying, okay, so I currently work. My question is, tell me about how you used Excel to solve a problem. My situation is I work on a team of data analysts and we're in Excel every day. Cool. All right. T, task. I was asked to look at the company's data on our customer turnover and make a decision on how we should best upsell our products. I made that up. Okay, action. Okay, so here's what I actually did to use Excel to solve that problem. I don't know anything really about Excel, so I'm not gonna make that one up. So R is the one where people forget a lot, and that's the result. So after we hear what you actually did, I want to hear how it went, like good or bad. And I think that's important to note that like we train our interviewers that like if they said, oh, it went terribly, but here's what I learned from it, that's still a really good answer, because you can learn probably more from things that go wrong than things that go right, right? So a good interview team will be trained to ask you questions. Like if you were to interview with me and you went STA and you stopped, I would be like, how did it go? What happened? Tell me more. I would know about this STAR, but if you have this is like a little interview hack. If you can answer every question with STAR, you answer the question fully and you're like kind of good to go. Okay. Let me get through one more question, one more answer, and then if anybody has questions, we can go through that. The art of negotiation. Okay. When you get a job offer, I'm not going to say all of you should negotiate. I would never accept a job anymore without negotiating my salary. Because the absolute worst thing that can happen is they say no, and your offer is still the same. If a company were to pull your offer because you negotiated, you didn't want to work there anyways, I'll be honest, like any company that is that sleazy, you're not interested. The best thing that can happen is they say, sure, or they say, you know what, let's meet in the middle and I'll give you $5,000 more. Even if you came into the interview process and you said, let's say, for example, you said, I want to make 50K. Okay, cool. And then they offer you 50K at the end, you were like, hey, when I thought a little bit more about the role and I talked a little bit more to my friends and I saw a little bit more about the market, I actually think 55 would be a little bit more in line with what I want to, like, what I see myself being successful at. That's okay. And a good recruiting team, like our team, would be like, good on you. Like, go ask for what you want. So don't be afraid to negotiate. Like, why not? What's the worst I can have? Okay, that's all I have. So. Spoon fed you a lot of information. Yes.
So I have a couple of questions, and first, on my first question that I have, even if you know how much the market pays, because we are gonna be so new, you
Yeah.
have to be flexible. That's
Sure.
That's a takeaway, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, being flexible is important, but also another thing of like doing research, like know how much you need to live and then add on to that. Like if I were to live in Birmingham, Alabama, and then I were to apply to a job in Los Angeles, California, like 50K is not gonna go the same. So you also need to be aware of the market of the location that you're into and what you actually physically need to be able to afford rent, housing, all that stuff, because bills suck.
You also mentioned that because of the law in Europe, you
Yeah.
need to get rid of CVs 6 months.
Yeah. Yeah,
So can the person apply again with the same CV?
totally.
So you can still be in the system if you take,
Yes, you can reapply to as many roles as you want, and we're establishing something, I can't remember what it's called right now, where after 6 months, we'll send you an email and we'll say, do you want us to keep your resume on file? And you can check yes or no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And last question. I've been to several group interviews. And
Okay.
I know that there are different. So do you have any tips for that?
Oh my gosh, I would hate a group interview. Like how many people are in this interview process?
Around 5, 4.
So 5 people are interviewing at the same time together. Never had anyone bring that. Gosh, do I have any tips?
Is it not common here?
No.
Oh.
I mean, I've heard of it before, but like I would never put anyone through that because that's so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I wish I had advice for that. I don't know. I've
I
never
didn't know
been
it wasn't common here. I thought it was.
It does happen though,
It does happen. I've
Yeah,
heard of
I-
it happening, especially for entry level roles, but I would never subject a candidate to have to do that. Usually I try like to maximize. It will be always one person, but then like maximize that you talk to 2 people in one call because over 2 can be like a little overwhelming. I'm gonna firing squad and push.
Yeah, so when it comes to keywords, I know a lot of companies now use automated resume scanning software. How do you recommend ensuring that our resumes make it through the system?
Okay, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. That's actually like a common misconception. A lot of people who don't know about recruiting will say, oh, they'll say the ATS is deciding. I don't know any ATSs that really decide. Like maybe if you apply to like Cisco or IBM or like humongous company where they probably get thousands and thousands of resumes, they're like pulling for specific keywords. Our ATS does not decide, and most companies are on our ATS because we have a really good one. So that's kind of tends to be more of a myth than reality. But something I always say is like, if you're looking at a job description and it says you need to like look at the top 3 points because everything after that is just nice to have. Look at the top 3 points because I try to have them list in order of importance. If somebody says you need to have Excel skills, your resume needs to say the word Excel. So make sure that that you're reading that job description, like the top 3 bullet points or anything that's like, we literally will bold some words to be like, you need this. Make sure that your resume has that because that's a really easy way to get rid of it. But some people will tell you you need to copy and paste the job description on white on your resume. Please don't do that. But I control F and then I see it and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Typically, if you're applying for any company that's not like a humongous company, I can't speak to those, but the vast majority, we view them with our eyes and make decisions with our brains.
Yeah, it's just
The federal ones might be different.
That's true. That's true. I can't speak to those, but from a corporation perspective, we look at everything with our eyes.
Yeah, on the note of the keywords and things on your resume, I'm curious, like your thoughts on when you've mastered something enough to put it on a resume. I know that you don't wanna, of course, lie, but then sometimes maybe you hold things back because you're like, I know Excel, but not confident, when in reality,
Yes.
you do know Excel, so like, when is the right time to?
And then listen to this, there's a type of bias in which the more you know about something, the more you realize you don't know. So like, I could be like, I'm really good at Excel, but because I never play in it, I'm like, I think I've got it mastered. But the more you know about it, the more you're like, oh my gosh, look at how much there is to learn. It's tough. Like, I wouldn't feel confident, like, putting something on my resume that I can't actually like successfully do on the first day. Like if I was saying, oh, I'm really good at pivot tables, I don't know anything about pivot tables. Like they're gonna hold you accountable to what's on your resume. So like it kind of is gray, right? Like if you've used it, if you haven't used it in like a couple of years, let's cut it out. But like if you feel like, all right, I have like a pretty good grasp of this, think about like everybody else who's on your level. Like, can they have like the same grasp that I do? Do I have like a better grasp than them or not? But it is so hard because like, yeah, I'll see people who are like software engineers and they're like, oh, I'm kind of like mediocre at this tool, but it's because they know more than the average person and they know how much there is to know. So
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer.
One anecdote on that is I was asked on a scale of 1 to 10 how much I knew Excel. This is like my first entry level internship
Yeah.
after undergrad.
Yeah.
And I think I said 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And then they immediately said, what are your 3 favorite formulas and how do you use them? And I was like, thank goodness I said 6 or 7. Because if I only said 10 or something, like, you know, I wouldn't probably know.
Yeah, they might hold you accountable to that. So don't say anything that you don't feel like pretty confident. Yeah.
So I don't fully know how the system works here,
Totally.
but because you said that 90 days, you have
Yeah.
90 days to fire somebody.
In EU, yes.
Yes, but then just because I know that in Sweden at least,
Uh-huh.
you get a 6-month contract. And then it doesn't get renewed if they are like, don't want you there anymore. Is that a thing you guys do?
So like you can get a contract job here and kind of everywhere where, yeah, it'll be like 6 or 12 months. And then at the end of that, they can decide whether to renew or not. That's not something we typically do for full-time roles. We will give like a permanent unlimited contract. And then like 60 to 90 days of that is a probationary period. And in that probationary period too, it's important to note that like employees and employers hold equal amount of power. So in that 60 days, for any reason, you can say this ain't working for me and hop out too. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for like the waiting periods when you're looking for a job and it gets like really stressful? How would you deal with that or how?
Gosh, looking for a job can be such a pain and it can be so demoralizing. Like, please know it's not about you at all. It's gonna be less about you of like, we have we have roles that like in 24 hours, we have 400 applicants and that's nothing compared to what I usually see. But like, if you're not like one of the best 395, like you might get a rejection. You're like, dang, what is it about me? It could not be less personal. Like it's so not personal at all. So try to keep that into account because it can be so demoralizing. And I feel like it's even demoralizing for me and I understand how the system works. So just do your best, take care of yourself, know that you're great. And the right company to find. I do believe that like everything that's meant for you will not pass you by. So like you just gotta know that the right thing to you is gonna find you and you're gonna find it and it's gonna be perfect and it's gonna work out great. But on the way to get there, it can be really demoralizing. It can be a lot of rejections. It's so not personal. So try not to take it personally. There could be 100 million reasons that you get rejected and you're never gonna know them. Like I might close a role or I might decide, oh, I open in the US, never mind, I need in Germany, and I might never tell you that. You're like, what is it about me? It's nothing about you. So try not to take it personally.
Is a way to tackle that to apply for a lot of jobs, like a lot of jobs that have similar things that you're looking for, and then
Yeah,
eventually-
so I think the further you get up your career, the more like specific you can be in like, I want this role, I want this company, I know a lot about this. Maybe in the beginning, like, yeah, you are probably bulk applying for jobs, but like still try to be picky in that framework too, right? Like, don't accept a job with 1 star on Glassdoor who's like, they treat you terribly, you're gonna be working 70 hours a week, get paid nothing. So try to hold like those specific set of standards when you apply. But I think you're right. In the beginning, it is a little bit more of like a volume and a luck game. Then as you continue further on in your career, you'll have connections. A lot of times people just reach out to you saying, do you want this job? And not vice versa. That's really nice. That is a perk of like getting really specific in a specialized area. Yeah.
Can you please talk about networking, the importance of networking? A lot of what we do for our in our program is connecting current students with grads and telling that story. And networking can be it sounds scary and it can be scary and it's hard to sort of LinkedIn has made life a little bit easier in that regard, but what would be your tips?
Yeah, networking is so important. It's not fun. It's never fun. Never at all. It's like so exhausting and making small talk all the time. Nobody likes to do it, but like I always say, like it's a really small world, and like you'll never know who I know that you might know, and things like that. And we rely really heavily in the recruiting industry on who people know and what stories they can tell them. So that's why I always say, like my like low key tip is like be nice and be easy-ish to work with. Like of course don't let somebody bully you and abuse you, but like be nice to people and be easy to work with, because your reputation matters a lot. Especially in the world of LinkedIn, because I could go look at Ola's profile and then I can see we have 5 people in common. I can message them and be like, oh, hey, good to talk to you. Tell me what you know about Ola. And they're like, she was kind of mean to me. And I'm like, done. That would never happen. I never happened. But who you know is sometimes, and especially the further you get in your career, sometimes more important than what you know. So networking is important. Take advantage of those connections. Like especially early in your career, take advantage of every opportunity you have to know someone, add them on LinkedIn. So that way, like you can at least, like there are so many people that I would have forgotten about if they weren't constantly popping up on my LinkedIn feed. So you can have that connection there. And then you can always like say, I want a job at UNC and I'm connected with people and I'm like, oh my gosh, tell me more about UNC. Do you actually like working there? That's a really great thing to have from your network. But then also, can you help me? Our referral system, like 1/3 of everyone we hire is a referral currently at Commercetools this year. So who you know is incredibly important, because a referral goes a long way. So especially early in your career, like understand what like networks you want to establish, and then go after those and get those, and treat people nicely, and you'll do really well.
In the referral system, the employee gets some money, right?
Yes. So at Commercetools, we pay $2,000 if you refer someone. So I have folks who refer like 4 or 5 people a year, and like that's like a side salary almost. So yeah, in corporate you do.
I think this is a good thing for you all to think about, of course, because networking goes 2 ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. And like if you know something, like don't be afraid to send someone a message. If you like went to high school with somebody or went to college with somebody, like it's been a while, but like we had like a good rapport, we were in a class together and we were pretty active in that class, like yeah, they also will want to refer you if they think that you're good, because then they make money off of you too. Yeah.
Along that, then, how do you know you're close enough to somebody to use them network? Because like let's say I just met like the ambassador. I don't think I can use him to network. You know?
That's so true. So that's actually something we're working on. Like we're revamping our referral program internally, because I have a lot of people who will just reach out to like our engineering manager and be like, will you refer me? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, how do you know this person? They're like, I don't. So we're like really getting specific on that. I would say like, you've had a conversation with them, like you've met them, and you can also like start the conversation from a point of curiosity of like, hey, I saw that you had this role posted on your site, like can you direct me to anything that like I could learn more? It sounds super interesting, like how do you like working there? And then that can kind of facilitate that conversation, and start the conversation, and then hopefully it could lead in that direction of like, oh, you want to apply here, I think you'd be really good at it, let me put in a good word. Good words go a long way.
Just 2 follow-ups. So one on the ambassador, that's also, I mean, he, works for the EU. It's a very different kind of situation.
Yeah.
But who works with him at the delegation, right? So if you connect with him and then follow him or the delegation, and you see where there's connection, and he's been at an event with, so-and-so who's running something, one of their local hires or things like that, it starts to build, and then you build that network around him. So I think that point is really important, even though he might not be the one, that you're taking to coffee but I mean, you can still do that, but I think, figure out who's around him, I think is important.
Yeah.
And the second part is, when you reach out to someone on LinkedIn and want to connect with them, please write a note.
Yes.
You agree?
I accept everyone. So I'm like the bigger my network, because that helps my job, right? But yes, write them a note of like, really interested in connecting with you, X, because here's why. Because most people don't accept just anybody. If you don't want to have me on LinkedIn, I'll accept you. You don't have to write it down. It's my job to be well networked. But something else is like, it maybe not at like the ambassador level. But like if you have somebody who's like, maybe you think is like maybe a step up or like where you'd like to go, stay active too, like on their LinkedIn, because if you're like actively like commenting or liking, the more they're gonna have that name recognition with you. And then you never know when that might come in handy of like, oh, that person applied for the job. Her name sounds so familiar. Oh my gosh, she's active with me on LinkedIn. Let me go check out her LinkedIn profile. You never know. I don't know if that's ever actually happened, but you never know. It could have. Oh, something else. Sorry if am I taking too long?
No, great.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. Mentors are important. So I actually have 2 mentors and I chose them for very specific reasons. So one of my mentors, her name is Rachel. She was my boss in my last company. I really like her as a mentor because she can help me with like my real life, real job situations of like, hey, I have this situation I'm dealing with. How would you help me deal with that? And she helps pull me up from a, like she's doing jobs that I want to do perspective, right? So she's like in my general realm. I have a mentor at Commercetools, which is like a little bit more of a strategic mentorship. And I do love him. So like, don't tell Matt words I said this, but something that like also we talk about a lot when we're talking about equality is a lot of almost all conversations that are going to happen about you happen in a room that you're not in, that you can't participate in. So the more people that you can have in your corner in those rooms, the more impact you're going to feel in your career. So Matt Alberts, love him. Like we established a really good early connection because we're both from the Midwest. Like we just get along super, super well. Really like him as a person. He's also a white male who runs a team. And in tech and in corporate tech, white males run the world. They're in all the rooms. They're talking about me. So that's a little bit more of like a strategic mentor, right? Because the more I keep him updated with what's going on and the more we stay in touch, the more he can advocate for me in rooms that I am not in. So be thinking of that too as you're considering mentors of like, it is important to have somebody who can help pull you up the ladder and teach you the skills, but then it's also super important to have somebody internally in your company who can help you get ahead. Especially if you are in like a remote job and you're not going to be making that like water cooler conversation. Like it's super important to have somebody that you can go to who like knows you pretty well and putting intention into that relationship is a little bit harder working remotely. Yeah.
I have a question, but it's kind of obvious maybe, but I want to hear your point of view. So if I'm preparing myself for an interview,
yeah,
I always think about how formal I should look.
Good question.
Sometimes they don't say how formal they want you.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah.
So how do I?
So I think take a look at like the organization that you can never be overdressed. You can feel uncomfortable, but I'm never going to look at somebody and be like, they were really overdressed. I'll feel bad because they met me yesterday in my work life and I had my hair on top of my head. I don't wear any makeup. We're a tech company. We wear t-shirts. I'm wearing pajama pants every time that you interview with me. But if you're going to work for the ambassador, wear like something nice. You'll almost never have to wear like a tie. I don't think ties are kind of out. But like an interviewing perspective. But kind of understand the industry, but always lean for being a little bit more overdressed because like it can't hurt. Underdressed, not a thing for me, not in a tech company. Yeah, just don't look sloppy, I guess. Yeah, you wouldn't look sloppy. Something that actually like low key is almost more important of how you dress. And we advertise this on our page too, your background. Your background can introduce a lot of bias into the interview process. And you'd be shocked at the amount of times I've had people be like, I couldn't get through this interview because I was so distracted by all their dirty dishes. Their laundry was everywhere. Like they were a mess. They really not professional, not prepared. Use a virtual background because that eliminates that bias right there. Or do like a very clear like wall in the back. Like that will be helpful. Just don't let your background speak louder than your mouth. Question over here.
It's more for comment, but
Yeah.
I think all these kind of tips and rules are important, but at the
Yeah.
same time, like regarding Leo's question, I also think sometimes if this is a job where I have to dress up
Yeah.
as something I'm not to get the job, then maybe that's not the right job for me.
Love it.
So I always feel like I'm just being myself, and
Yeah.
if they don't like my shirt, then they don't like it.
Yeah. And they're gonna figure out who you are anyways, and you're gonna figure out who they are
Yeah,
anyways.
yeah.
So you might as well be your full self in the interview process. Yeah, I'm with it. I like it. Trying to think if there's anything else that can part. Any other topics you want me to cover? Yeah.
How important is it for you to stay on top of LinkedIn? Because I've really been slacking on LinkedIn, I won't lie. It just seems like another social media, and if I have to do that to be able to get a job, it seems like a lot.
No.
If it's something I need to do to get a job, I will do it.
Make sure your profile's updated, make sure you have like a picture, make sure so something that's easy to do that I do with all my jobs is, I just copy and paste a lot of stuff in my resume into my LinkedIn profile because here's something else you all might not know. I have, LinkedIn Recruiter, which is like a feature of LinkedIn that allows me to search people's LinkedIn profiles. And I'll go in there and I'll say, I want somebody who lives in the United States. I want somebody who has these keywords on their LinkedIn profile. And if you don't have those on your resume, even if you have those in real life, you're not going to be pulled up in my search and I'm not going to be reaching out to you about a job. So like base level, make sure your LinkedIn profile is updated. You have like a professional photo, like you have all of your skills listed, like list a bunch of stuff. Being active in the corporate world, like I think being active is like a big asset, but it's not necessarily end all be all. Like if I were hiring a software engineer and they're not active on LinkedIn, I don't actually care. But I don't know if you're hiring, like if I were hiring like a sales leader and they're not active on LinkedIn, that's like a huge red flag for me. So I guess it just depends what you're looking to do, but at base level, make sure your profile's up to date.
Following up on that, I get asked a lot, should my resume match my LinkedIn profile? I'll see a gazillion things on their resume. It's not on LinkedIn. LinkedIn will just say like, I'm a student at UNC, but nothing more. Or LinkedIn is really full and there's nothing on the resume. And they're like, well, they'll look there anyway, or they'll look there anyway. What do you say to them?
Try to make it match up like as much as possible. I think LinkedIn be a little bit briefer. Like my LinkedIn is not going to have everything that my resume has. It might just have like 5 bullet points, whereas, well, you shouldn't have that much more than 5 bullet points. I think my LinkedIn is probably a little bit more brief than my resume would actually be. But make sure you're not like lying on either of them. Like if your LinkedIn, your resume don't match at all, then there's a problem. Yes, huge red flag.
I am so sorry for another question.
No. This is what I'm here for.
How long should your resume be?
Good question. Okay, if you have never had a professional job, I would say if you have mine, okay, I can give you my own experience. I'm 30. I've been working for 8 years. Mine is no more than 2 pages. I don't necessarily believe, I've had a lot of people be like, oh, it needs to be 1 page. Like, you've been working for 20 years. You shouldn't be able to fit everything on 1 page. But if you haven't had a lot of professional experience, 1 page is perfect because you don't want to be too wordy, but you also want to make sure, like I said, you're getting those keywords in, you're getting those really important things in. So it depends on your experience. Don't be afraid to bleed into the 2nd page. It's not like, gosh, when I grew up and I was in college, they're like, you better not make it to that 2nd page. It's fine, especially as you continue to grow your career. If you've been working for like 25 plus years and it's longer than 3 pages, that's too long. I would say somewhere, if you have work experience, 2 to 3 pages, perfect. But if you're going to page 4 and 5, I'm like, man, this person is really not being brief.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions about resumes.
I love it
too. So, how much should you include about like school activities if you're looking for like a professional job? Should you go back to what you did in high school or just completely cut everything from high school out? Should I include that I was in certain extracurriculars in undergrad when I'm a grad student?
Yeah.
Like, where should I with that?
Good question. Okay. If you've graduated college, I think it's fair to cut out high school. I think, I don't think that that's relevant anymore. Extracurriculars can totally work in your favor, especially if they're really cool. Like if I were to have somebody who applied from UNC and they just said, oh, I went to UNC, and then I were to have like the president of the student body, like I'm gonna interview the president of the student body. So any extracurriculars I think make you look even more employable, especially if you don't have a lot of like experience. And then you can kind of lean on those in an interview and be like, oh, the more you can pull for like these types of questions, the better you are. So like the more involved you are, the more you're going to be able to pull real life experience, have real life experience under your belt, which is unfortunately something a lot of people look for in entry level roles. So if it's important, like, and it's relatively recent, yeah, you can put it. For me, where I am in my career, I have just the year I graduated and what my degree was. I went to school.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a great Friday and weekend.